Hey, people, we are on number 2 of 5, episode 2 of 5 of a series on the temperaments. Today, we are focusing on
cholerics,
the choleric temperament. So, we're going to be talking about the dark side of this temperament, the light side, things that you can do to grow in virtue and overcome some of the habitual vices associated with this temperament. It's fun.
and just give you some practical applications that you can use today, here and today. So I think you guys will like it. If you're married to a choleric, if you are one, if you have a child who's a choleric, you're going to love this. So check it out.
See you in there.
Hey, guys.
This is going to be a great podcast. You know why? Because we're talking all about me. Dominantly. A little bit secondarily about Aaron. We're talking about cholerics.
Yes. So if you guys didn't listen to our previous podcast, we did kind of an introduction, explanation of what the temperaments are. There's 4 basic temperaments, one of the oldest personality tests out there. And then each one of these podcasts, today we're going to be talking about choleric, next week, sanguine, so on and so forth. So we're going to be focusing really heavily on choleric today.
Yes, particularly the vices that they're inclined to, the virtues that come a little bit easier for them. And
what
then,
to do if you are this temperament.
Yeah, the goal is growth and holiness. And so we like to say that the temperaments are like you are here. Like when you look at the big map, they're like, you are here. This is your natural inclinations to thinking, feeling, and acting, and how you show up. And when you start to know where you are, it's a lot easier to build the path, you know, and understand where there are some, where the work needs to be done, where the focus needs to be, and the focus that's going to create the greatest impact on your life and on that of the kingdom.
Yeah. So most people have one predominant temperament.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
And then a secondary.
Few people are just full on choleric or full on like 100% sanguine. And as you're growing in life, as you're actually growing in holiness, you're kind of picking up traits of others because you don't want to be one for your entire life, because chances are you're going to be falling into those weaknesses a lot more. And so we want to grow. Jesus didn't have one temperament. He had all the positive qualities of all 4 of them.
The perfection of all the temperaments,
Yes.
right? And so during your path of growth through nurture, right, you might start to even develop some tendencies that are found more in other temperaments. Now, you never get completely away from your primary temperaments that you receive at birth. These are part of our nature. They are bodily, right? But our virtues have a way of starting to change our bodily composition.
And then
right?
grace.
Which is what grace does,
starts
right?
to change it too.
And so, we talk about well-worn neural pathways, ways that we emotionally respond to things, the chemical messages in our body. Like these are things that are quite incarnate in us, and they have natural dispositions associated with them. We cluster those natural dispositions under a category that we call temperaments. But it doesn't mean that you're stuck there any more than you're stuck with a certain pattern of thought or a pattern of emotion. We know that we have plastic minds, plastic brains, right? Neuroplasticity, right? And also we're not stuck with being crazy reactive, like cholerics we're going to be talking about here today. So,
Matt, you're predominantly choleric.
Which is why I'm talking so much right now.
And then your secondary is melancholic. And we will be talking about that in 2 weeks.
Yep.
I am predominantly sanguine, and then I have choleric as my secondary, which I've been shocked because I was raised by 2 phlegmatics, and I always thought I was phlegmatic. And every time I've taken the test, sanguine choleric. And I'm like, okay. Since I've been married to you, my cholerics certainly come out more.
Bubbled to the top. Certainly in owning a business as well.
Yes.
You kind of tend towards that. So, this stuff is all about letting you know this is where you are and helping you with your growth in holiness, right? Because we want to be more like Jesus. We will never be completely like Jesus on this side of heaven, but we can certainly grow in an imperfect beatitude, which comes through not only growing in natural virtue, an acquired virtue, but through infused virtues, which can only happen in the state of grace through God's grace.
Yes.
Where do we
dive
go
in.
here, Aaron? We're going to be talking can you give kind of some bullet points on,
Yes.
on the things we're going to be hitting on today in choleric?
So choleric is I like using the Winnie the Pooh characters.
Well, she's going to give us bullet points on what it is, but what I really meant like that is my choleric showing up. We're going to be talking about just what it is, natural tendencies, the dark side of it. We're also going to be talking about the light side of it. So those ways that where it's kind of inclined towards vice naturally or inclined towards virtue, some virtues that come a little bit easier. Just some natural tendencies of thought, feeling, and action there as well. And then if you are a choleric, what are some things that you can do to start to perfect some of these deficiencies and these dark sides so more of the light can show up?
And utilizing your strengths as a cleric to overcome those deficiencies. So it's very, we always talk about Clifton strengths. Matt's getting, or is actually certified in that.
As soon as I get the stamp, I got a couple more people to coach. So,
but I love that psychology in that, and when you lean into your strengths more, you actually can overcome deficiencies in your life. So we're going to kind of give you some ways to do that if you are predominantly cleric.
Yeah, lest you miss the mark and think that we all have to be just like Mother Teresa and how we show up as saints. Aaron, you say it all the time. The saints were so different. There's such diversity in our church. And why is that? Because they have different temperaments. They had different gifts. They have different abilities. They have different charisms. And the combination of all of those things is really how we manifest God in a very particular way to the world and really step into that particular place in the hierarchy of the way that God reveals himself.
All right. So let's dive in.
Okay, go ahead. That was her choleric being like, stop.
Winnie the
My
Pooh
turn.
characters. We
All
talked
right.
about this last time. This is Rabbit, choleric. So if you need a visual like I do, this is Rabbit, the
So if
one who
you're-
comes in and bosses people around.
Kind of a jerk sometimes. Like it's been like
A little jerky.
You like watch Rabbit and you're just like,
How are you friends? How are you guys all friends?
why do people like you?
Yeah.
I don't really like you.
So basically, the main distinctions between the temperaments is actually how they respond to stimuli and for how long. So just a review, right?
A review. Review. It's a review.
A review of last week. Choleric is quick to react, and it's an intense reaction, and it's for a long duration.
Yeah.
So
we
it's
talked
that big. What is it?
the 2,000-pound bomb that has the incendiary after effect. So big blast, and then also it lingers.
Yes.
The effects of it linger for a while, right?
They're also very active in their reason and will. They utilize their reason and will. They're very logical, a lot of times very smart,
Very practical.
practical. So when you're thinking about the interior life of what St. Thomas Aquinas talks about, they utilize their reason and will often. They have a strong willpower. Actually, they're the ones who can like really work through the duration. So it's this intensity and also like carry the job through. They are goal focused. They are motivated by excellence and greatness. But it kind of depends on where they're directing that excellence and greatness. If they're like, it's me, that can become vicious, you know? If it's God, I can move towards that. And so there's a lot of saints who are clerics, like a lot of them, because they directed that motivation of greatness, like, and really kind of entering into that greatness through grace.
Yeah, that magnanimity is a bit of a foreshadowing, but like that's one of the light sides. So where
of the
you can
natural
be,
virtues,
like
yeah.
on the vicious side, it's like ungodly self-reliance. That shows up in my journal so much versus, and there's all the pride that's grounded in it, versus the magnanimity. It's not me doing the work. It's relying on God, and it's all for the glory of God.
Yeah. Awesome. Do you want to pick out some of the light side of the cleric, my love?
Sure.
Since you are choleric.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we talked about quick react, long duration. And so there's a steadfastness, I think, with the choleric. So it's not just like, I know I give the analogy of like the bomb and the slow burn, but it also can show up in very, and that sounds very destructive, but it can show up in very kind of motivated. So some motivational ways.
Yeah,
right?
you want a choleric on your team.
So there's
you want a job.
There's sustainment. It wants to see something through completion. There's a steadfastness that's there. Even if that emotion kind of goes away, that's where that logical side can take over and be like, no, I may not be feeling it today, but that discipline, that rigidness is something that keeps you going through. A leader, I think of somebody that could be not just a catalyst, but that just starts and then walks away, but somebody that there's a steadfastness again that's there. So creating that vision, that long-term vision, I think that they can develop plans quite well.
Yep.
You said that they're pragmatic, they're smart, and while they are, they can be very passionate in the moment. They can have kind of those explosive emotions that could go positive or negative. Like ultimately, it's easier to incline them to run their life or live their life through reason than feeling. So if we look even Myers-Briggs, I see in that personality test, I see them being more of the thinking versus feeling on that. And I found myself kind of being very close on those things.
ESTJ
like the ENTJ, like those things are the other pieces that are there. Decisiveness, right? Often, but often can move very quickly. So they're good when somebody is getting stuck. And so how I show up as a choleric coach, and I'm working with somebody that could be stuck, it could be decisive to just get people moving. And I can often lend my decisiveness to a team or to a client to start getting into action. But oftentimes, not every single decision needs to be made very quickly. That's kind of the inclination. Do it, get it done, move on.
Yeah.
Learn through doing versus thinking. They're
driven to achieve goals.
Yeah, so I like the driven.
Done is better than perfect.
Yep. Love that. They're very productive. They're hardworking people on a team. So that's some of the light side of the choleric.
Yeah, I want to add a couple more. They're actually optimistic, believe it or not. They're not, we're kind of getting in the dark side because they're not always like inclined towards like really close relationships. Like they're kind of like, we're all here to get a job done. They're focused on the job getting done. So that motivation can kind of override the relationship side of things, but they're optimistic. They're like, they look for the positive because they're like, we can get this done, right? I love willful and productive, and these things will actually show up in the spiritual life. When you have a strong will, you can like really enter into sacrifice and mortification and just being like willing to get on a disciplined prayer life. So that's really, really helpful.
They're prone towards that discipline. So I think of like a little anecdote. When I did Exodus 90, it was, there was a lot of like 16 ascetic practices that you adhered to for 90 days, like cold showers or prayer time in the morning, not eating between meals, fasting on, doing a larger fast each week, abstaining from meat. For me as a choleric, it was, I kind of like responded well to that because I liked the structure of it. And my secondary tendency as a melancholic really helped. It was helpful there as well because there was an element of contemplation that was part of the Exodus 90. And in my estimation, that's where it really worked well. But also there was a bit of kind of this, look at what I'm doing, this ungodly self-reliance. I'm able to do this, check in the box, look how great I am. That's kind of where the pride, the dark side of the cleric can even show up with ascetic practices where it's not for the glory of God, but it's for some sort of self-referencing, see, I did this, therefore I'm good.
Yeah, self-affirmation.
Affirmation.
He is so much like that. No, I'm totally kidding. Just watch.
It's like, just wait. Like, that reaction was a little bit tempered there, but it's still slow burning right now.
Oh,
It'll
that's
show
so
up in like
nice.
a body check later on.
No, there's no abuse here.
A gentle nudge.
Our cholerics tend to butt heads a lot, but okay, so
the dark side.
Get
to the dark side.
Go ahead.
Luke.
You want me to do it, or you want to do it?
No, you can throw all kinds of darts at me right
I'm
now.
like,
Go ahead.
Matt is.
And like my choleric side's going to be
conceited.
going, no, not me. Not me. So not me.
This is an area where I've already grown. Matt is, no, I'm just kidding. The dark side of the cleric.
Half kidding.
Doesn't display emotions easily except for anger. That's one of their favorites. And I can really relate to these two, by the way. And the interesting thing is, this is how I found it interesting with the predominant and then the secondary, is it kind of shows up. So where my cleric shows up is in my business, is in the areas of attachment that I actually need to kind of...
Tell me more about that.
Yes, because I was thinking, I'm like, can phlegmatic and choleric be together? Can choleric be like a predominant and secondary? And you would think that these are complete opposites. But I'm like, you know what? Actually, it would, because they both kind of lack emotionality a little bit. So there is that alignment with the choleric and the phlegmatic. But I think where your phlegmatic might show up, if you were that person, where a phlegmatic might show up is an area of detachment. Like they don't really care about this thing. But where maybe their choleric shows up is an area of attachment. And so it's like...
Particularly to like attachment to other people's perceptions of them. And yeah.
Right. And so I can explain it from my point of view. So I'm sanguine choleric, and you would think by the level of reaction and then holding on to it, right? So it's like we both have like these big explosive reactions, but the sanguine lets it go. There are certain things I don't let go, and that's where my choleric shows up. And so what that can tell me is personally where I have an attachment to something, or I have pride, or, some kind of vanity attached to it. Yeah.
Oh, I love that, Erin.
Anyway.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So,
and I think that I love how you highlighted this prone to anger, right? That's kind of the explosive side of things. It could still show up in passions, right? That are, but I don't see myself as really a highly emotional person. Even my Clifton strengths, empathy is kind of something that's low on the totem pole, because when somebody shows up to the team specifically and they're just like, oh, I'm having this kind of emotional thing going on, and it's just like, I look at it and it's like, okay, I get it. Like, we still have work to do.
Well, okay, so that
we
makes
still
sense.
have to get things done.
It's not that it's more what it's directed towards. So it's like, empathy is a relationship strength.
Sure.
So it's like you might not have emotions for other people or feel other people's emotions, which is high empathy.
Or feel inclined to it. It's not like I don't feel anybody's emotions.
Right. But also...
I'm not a monster.
Because your choleric side of it is what do we need to get done? It's that like...
It's like compartmentalize.
That's that achiever in you. And so I think your emotions show up when it comes to business.
Oh, yeah?
Yes. I always know something's off when Matt runs up the stairs really fast and it's like,
the office is
working on
upstairs.
something.
She's like, what? What's going on?
Working on something just like crazily. I'm like, okay, that's emotional. So anyway.
Anyways.
They are eager to express themselves, which I don't think that's really a dark side. I think that's actually, but they are, they can kind of dominate a conversation.
Yeah, it can show up as just not listening. So it's just like, no, I really want you to see me, and you, not so much. Like, you are there to see me and what's going on in my interior life.
Yes. They actually are not
affirm it.
afraid of debate. They actually love debates because they're like, I'm right. And so I can't wait to tell you how I'm right. That shows up for me, for sure.
Yeah, and some of these as we're reading through these, they're a little bit caricature. So, like, they're a bit extreme examples here, though some of these things are just like, oh, no, that's dead on. So just kind of think of these things on a spectrum, right? Where you might not just be like, oh, I'm never listening to the other person, but you may be inclined to speak more than listen during a conversation.
Yes. They are quick-tempered. They are interruptive. They need acknowledgement. They lack sympathy. They are intense. They can be defensive and prideful. Like, pride is one of the number one vices.
President Trump was not a choleric.
Jokingly.
False.
That is very false.
need high significance.
I would say pride and impatience are like the number one vices when it comes to the choleric. Yeah. And I don't want to go into full detail. As we were telling you guys last podcast, we're going to be creating a test. And you can take this test. And it's going to be a combo test with the temperaments and the charisms. And you're going to get a full report. And so all of the things that we're reading from right now, you are going to receive that. It's going to be awesome. So check that out.
Yep. There's going to be a free version of that. And also to get the kind of the full report. There's a little bit of cost associated with that on that. So that will not be free, but that will be worth the investment to know just that natural disposition and then the way that God loves to pour himself into you through his grace in particular ways.
Because God, grace works upon nature. We know this.
Yeah, we don't lose our temperaments because like God does not hijack our temperaments or our bodies.
But he needs a place to rest. His grace needs a place to rest. And so if we are being stupid, prideful jerks because we're cholerics.
Big stupid jerk.
We can't actually receive that grace of transformation and actually to give to others, which is the role of the charisms in the church.
I'm looking at this word interruptive that you've written down, and I never do that on this podcast.
Never.
And
I
Aaron
don't either.
Aaron is actually I know that I interrupt you quite a bit on the podcast, Aaron.
I do my eye rolls so people can see if you're watching this on YouTube. So that's actually for your
By the way,
viewing
like,
pleasure.
subscribe, watch it on YouTube.
All right, so
Get these things to
natural
the top of the chart.
vices, because we kind of already talked about these. Let's go right to those, and then we'll get into the virtues. The natural vices and spiritual weaknesses of the cleric are pride, self-will, control, anger, ungodly self-reliance. You said that.
Yep.
A level of superiority, kind of like, I know what's right. You all, whatever.
Pat.
Yes. Lack of charity and impatience. I'm like, you want to see my cleric come out? You pat me on the head.
I did that once.
Yes.
Never again.
Yeah, he learned. Okay, so
stupid.
Natural virtues and spiritual gifts are.
I'll go. Zeal for souls, fortitude, magnanimity, knowledge, diligence, perseverance, leadership, enthusiasm. So again, you can see those virtues, like say, for example, perseverance. We talked about like there's a steadfastness, a persistence in that dispositions. There's a diligence. There's a natural subordination to a disciplined lifestyle or reason in this case. So it's just like, I don't care how you feel right now or how I feel right now. This is what we decided was
sense.
The best way to go about it or the right way to go about it. And so therefore we're going to be obedient to that. But still, it's that obedience, I would say, is not necessarily a natural disposition for the choleric. I think it's more of, again, that ungodly self-reliance. So it's more of an obedience to the self. That's more of a natural inclination. So this is where the pride can be that root sin, often that's showing up in the choleric. But what the choleric really needs is somebody to be obedient to.
Like a spiritual director.
And this even came out like where I was talking to my spiritual director and I said, Father, like I really need you to tell me what I need to do, because I think I know what needs to be done, but particularly with structuring my prayer life, I found it was feeling, I had some judgments on it being a little bit more fluid. And so with him, we kind of built a more of a structure to my prayer life. And it's like, this is what the gold standard looks like for Matt's prayer time in the morning and for the evening. And now it's about being obedient to that and being disciplined and building discipline in my lifestyle to keep that a priority.
So what virtues that a cleric could pray for are?
Obedience, I think that's
charity, patience, humility, docility.
Humility.
Yes. Meekness,
Maybe
which
definitely.
actually fights anger. Meekness does. A lot of people think that's weakness, but meekness is like a controlled strength.
Yeah, it's a controlled emotional release. So it's something we think of the virtues as there's not deficit or excess here. It's just a moderation, really, of these things. Meekness is really a moderation of anger.
Yeah. And prudence, actually, when it comes to goal setting, we'll get into that a little bit, but because the achieving of the goal is the goal, is at the end of it. There's not really a ton of discernment up front. Is this what God wants me to do? Is it not? So on and so forth. So famous choleric saints, St. Peter, St. Paul. There's a lot of choleric saints, though, out there. These are the ones who just, they did it. They did the duration of it. They took charge. They were kind of leaders. They were like unafraid. That was another positive quality, is like really just not prone to anxiety, just being like, let's see if it works. You know,
we said there's a natural virtue of fortitude that's there. And so I think back even to that, like doing Exodus 90, fortitude is that virtue that shows up when you're facing something arduous, something that is not going to be very pleasurable. And when you're entering into 90 days of ascetic practices, you're going to need some sort of fortitude there. So the clerics have a little bit of an upper hand when it comes to this, because there's a natural inclination towards that, versus the sanguines. I know a lot of the people that actually did not make the full 90 days, or really like reduce the amount of ascetic practices, tended to be a little bit more sanguine, which actually we'll talk about that more, but they feel inclined towards the
sensual goods.
Sensual goods. That effeminacy is one of those vices.
Which I'm okay with being effeminate because I'm feminine. No,
it's not. You're confusing the terms.
So anyway, I think a great story about Matt in his choleric disposition is when he was discerning the priesthood, and he was talking to his spiritual director, and he said, spiritual director was, well, why do you want to become a priest?
This is after I met Aaron. And
yes.
I was really thrown for a loop here.
I know. As you can tell.
Can you blame me?
Right?
Can you blame me?
Yeah. But the spiritual director asked him, why do you want to become a priest? He's like, because it's the best way. Or what did you say?
It's the harder way.
It's the holy way.
I think it's the harder way. And he goes, that is the worst answer I've ever had to that question.
Yeah. I mean, it shows like this motivation for excellence, but also a lack of prudence. Like, maybe I should have more reasons to do this. But it kind of showed, like, the willingness, like that strong will, but not really a ton, which is funny because you're kind of driven by the reason and will, but like that quickness, that impatience wants you to get the job done. So it just showed, you're a cleric who needed a little bit of guidance there.
I love these bullets that you've got here. It's like all under this now, like in our notes. If you are a cleric, you might blah. And so like, I kind of want to just run through some of these things. We don't need necessarily have to expand too much on them, but I love you are not easily convinced that you should do something. So you need to find rational and logical arguments that support what you are working towards.
Yes, 100%. Yep. And this shows up with even just my parenting with Avila. I'm pretty sure she's melancholic choleric. But when she gets frustrated or whatever, I just sit down and like talk to her. And I'm like, it's okay. This is why we are doing this. And she just absorbs it and she calms down immediately. And so it shows at a very young age, there needs to be this logical. So if you have children who are choleric, this is a great way to just explain it to them. Yeah,
and this is kind of leveraging a strength. If you find yourself inclined towards a particular vice and you have this choleric disposition, one of the ways that you can really grow to counter that vice is to start to build a case for why that vice is so terrible and why the virtue is so good. And so this is something that's been very helpful for me in my journaling. One of the things I love to do is come to know why the benefit I think that a vice is giving me. So we always do what we believe is in keeping with our greatest good, right? We always choose those things, as Aquinas would remind us. And so if I'm choosing something, that means I have a belief that it's going to bring some sort of good. So when I really challenge that and I adjudicate that thought or that disposition, and I find out that that's not really the case, it really starts to create a logical detachment to it. And it's very helpful for, I think, the cleric to build those logical cases against a particular vice. Pornography, that was one of the things where I was inclined towards pornography and the sin of masturbation for a while in my college years, and certainly my when I was in high school and that. When I started to realize that what I was seeking was love, a real authentic loving relationship, and that this means that I was going about it was never going to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish, it really weakened my inclination towards those habitual sins.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
Cool.
I love it.
What next? You might tend to think that other people might get in the way of achieving your goals.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I can certainly see that.
Which kind of goes into the next one where it's you might tend to become attached to your goals and the way that you've decided to achieve them. So it's like there's one way, it's my way, or whatever, it's the right way.
Mm-hmm.
So when somebody suggests something different, you may feel defensive.
Yep. The choleric can also, like on the dark side, tend to see people more as objects, means to an end, right? Cogs within a machine. And so this is where you see kind of the superficial boss that just doesn't really care. Kind of the movie Office Space comes to mind, and doesn't really care about the person, their emotional life. It's just like, just get it done, right? And so that could be kind of a natural inclination of the choleric here. You need to freely choose what you're going to do.
Yes.
It needs to be your choice. I love that.
Yes. Another thing is you hate waste, which is really fascinating because if you're thinking about the goal setting piece and you're like, I just want to get the job done. Done is better than perfect, so on and so forth. But like, because there is that lack of discernment and maybe that lack of slowing down, you are actually creating more waste. So it's really helpful to kind of slow this process down. This is why our journal is so powerful for clerics.
Because you can kind of start to grow in prudence, right? That's not necessarily one of the natural things. So because the cleric tends to react big and react fast, I know the way that this shows up in me is like when it comes to making decisions, it's just like, I want to get it done. I don't want to spend time really growing in knowledge of what the best choices are. I just want to make a choice, learn through failure, go forward with it. Now, this can often in a business be very expensive to do something like this. Sometimes it works and it gets us moving forward. Other times it can be very expensive. And so where I've seen to kind of counter a little bit of my fast-moving decisiveness in areas where it would be prudent to take your time, is I leverage other members of my team that have a little bit more of that melancholic disposition that are habituated to slowing things down, slowing down the decisions.
Or even phlegmatic.
Sure, or even the phlegmatic side of things. And so, Bryant, I lean on him a lot, and he also has some of those Clifton strengths that are kind of slower thinking skills that I love his deliberative. Because he's very good at weighing out risks. I love his intellection and his ideation. I love his analytical, which is something that kind of accessible, but it's not a really natural for me to just be seeking out all kinds of facts the way that he loves to just seek out the facts. So it's very helpful there. So that's kind of another thing here as well, folks. Like, when you start to recognize, this is part of building the structure to growing in virtue, when you start to recognize that you have these habitual ways of kind of responding that aren't really vicious, sometimes you can offboard something to somebody else, a task to somebody else that has more of maybe a more virtuous inclination towards that. And you can lean on one another and learn on one another and appreciate one another.
Living in like the communion of saints, in heaven and on earth here.
Yep.
You are not easily frightened by difficulties, and you're actually energized by challenges. So like if I were to be coaching Matt, I would kind of maybe lean into motivating him by a challenge, through a challenge, versus telling him his deficiencies, which is the next bullet, where it's like, do not tell the choleric their weaknesses, because you will be met with defensiveness and anger. Maybe, right.
The melancholic side of me wants to like take that in and like kind of perfect it, but like kind of the choleric side of it, and this is where it's been. I think I've grown a little bit. I used to really hate feedback because it would mean so much, but now learning how to really subordinate that defensiveness, which is very prone to defensiveness. And I think that's something that's also, defensiveness is just a nuance of anger, right? It's anger when there's a perceived assault. But yeah, I've never shown up virtuous in that emotion of defensiveness.
Yeah. So you're driven by challenge, but also if you can make things into a game that you can win, that's a really great way to work and lean into your strengths a little bit. Sorry, my nose is a little itchy.
That's okay. Now, me personally, I don't really, the game, the competition piece of it, it's not as exciting for me. And I think part of that is because I don't want it to be a game because you can lose at games. And I don't like to lose.
Yes.
But I can hear your sanguine coming through.
I'm totally kidding. I'm kidding.
I know. Don't play Parcheesi with me and my father.
No, do not do it.
Unless you're a phlegmatic.
Yeah.
Then you'll just have fun.
That's true.
Losing. Or rubbing interfaces.
So this is really helpful too. Like, you are highly productive, so it's really helpful to remember that you are a human being and not a human doing. And so really just entering into the present moment and not basing all of your worth on your productivity and what you're producing. Cholerics tend to struggle with sitting still and resting, even that virtue of eutrapelia. Of right recreation, because it's like, I'm not producing anything. Even like like the way that you would recreate, it'd be like, I'm going to learn how to make cheese, and like producing something.
Very active. Yeah.
So I don't even know if you need to do that. That might be the way that you recreate. I don't know if you need to change that, but like even just taking that to prayer and praying with that and being like, Lord, you made me this way. Like, how do I rest in you? And really making that an intentional prayer.
Yeah, and I think it's just, yes. So there's an inclination to be active, to be doing, and the saints all were able to rest.
Yes.
And pray. So there is something proper to all of humans to enter into that better part, as Jesus says, like, Martha, 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 you're anxious about many things. Mary has chosen the better part. She's sitting at my feet, and she's just in the gaze. She's just, she's in that contemplative gaze, and it will not be taken from her. So we are all called, whether we are naturally inclined to it or not, we are all called to have a contemplative life, a contemplative prayer life.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Do you want me to get into leaning into your strengths a little bit?
Yeah, I do. I like that.
Before we get, there are just more, I don't know, practical ways, which you love as a cleric, but pray the litany of humility daily.
Ouch.
It's not really leaning into a strength there, but next one. You are a natural leader, so make sure you're leading with integrity. So, because somebody will come in and just be like, hey, let's do this or whatever. But like to actually just kind of be like, why are we doing this? Just to stop and reflect there.
Yes.
To live in that leadership strength, that leadership, just to have a little bit more intentionality with that.
Know that you are inclined to action. And oftentimes we can act without really thinking. And so we can be out of integrity, which I think cholerics hate, being out of integrity.
Yes.
Because they're very, I think they tend to be very high belief, if again we're drawing from Clifton Strengths, are very principled. So just slowing down. This is, again, it's not necessarily a natural disposition for the cleric, but we all need to enter into that contemplative life, because otherwise, how are we going to receive that still small voice that really directs us
also
and gets away from that ungodly self-reliance?
Yeah, also using your natural hate of waste and your natural need to be productive to logically think, how do I create less waste in my life, maybe time and energy, and be more efficient with that? Like, I think that's like a driving force for clerics, being more efficient, and to just stop and having that be another logical reason to slow down.
Yes.
And to be very discerning and deliberative there.
Yeah. Why are you doing what you're doing? I think that's really a really important exercise when you're investing your time, your talents, your finances, your energy somewhere. Why are you doing what you're doing? And really grounding what you're doing in a strong ideal.
Yes.
That's really logically sound. And that's also aligned with the teachings of the faith here as well.
And what you say yes and no to, and I think this goes across the board for all of the temperaments, knowing your natural strengths and weaknesses, to know that maybe you're like, I just want to get the job done. This is a natural inclination for me. Maybe I hire somebody else to be a manager of the people. You know, like it doesn't mean that you don't grow in charity or anything like that, but it's just understanding what you say yes and no to. I think that's really helpful here too. I love this. You need high ideals and great thoughts, meaning like you want to be combining your need for excellence, like this motivation for excellence, to God, who is the excellent one. I love, there's 2 choleric saints. Saint Ignatius says, all for the greater glory of God. And I love this one. I was just recently coaching a choleric on this. I think this is St. Francis de Sales. I didn't write his name though. It says, what does it profit a man if he gain the whole world but suffer the loss of his soul? And I think that's a great thought for a choleric to have.
I think that's actually in Scripture.
Oh, it is in Scripture, but it was another saint who
Quoted Scripture?
Quoted Scripture. There you go. So it's, what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world by being productive and winning, you know?
Yeah.
But to suffer the loss of his soul, I think that's just a great ideal to lean in.
Yeah. I love what you wrote down here, and this is so simple. Practice asking God for help. All right. So again, there's a prone towards ungodly self-reliance, which is like the self-referencing. What do I got to do? The hyper-responsibility that's all on me. These kind of destructive thoughts that make you go independent and become a man or a woman on an island. But something that's been very helpful for me is understanding the anthropology of grace, like of how grace is something that God gives to us gratuitously when we're in a state of grace. So within, state of grace, so we don't have mortal sin on our soul, we can ask for an infusion of grace. And because we are in the family of God, in the fold of God, there's almost like a little bit of an entitlement for God to respond. Now, he decides what grace he's going to give to dole out that's associated with your purpose, what you're meant to accomplish. And so his grace is efficacious. It shows up there. But we also know that grace is something that is going to, it perfects our nature. It makes us more productive.
Yeah.
It makes us more effective. And so even that mindset is something that is, I'm kind of capitalizing that desire for efficiency and the best way, the logical way in being a strong leader. But I'm using it to grow perhaps in this virtue of docility that I may not necessarily be prone to.
One of the ways I think my choleric shows up in the spiritual life, and I remember this being a really motivating thought in my head, but it was the element of spiritual warfare. It's like we are in a war, and we actually do, with God's grace and cooperation with his grace, have the power to win this. And like, no, the enemy will not steal my soul. He will not win, at least in this story, in my story. And having that like need, that drive for a challenge and that drive for a win, I think that's a way of kind of leaning into your strength to fight the battle, to engage in the battle. And also like that natural lack of fear, lack of anxiety there. It's like you just go, let's go out there.
Yeah.
Get them, you know.
But if you don't know how to show up, which is one of our, we talked about the spiritual battle of the mind in our Mennonite Catholic Academy this month. If you don't know, if you don't have a proper orientation in the battlefield, that fortitude can turn into foolhardiness very quickly because if you don't know the rules, you are fighting a much stronger enemy.
You're toast.
Yeah, if you don't have Jesus in your corner, you're toast. Okay.
Yeah.
So practically ask God for help. Consider yourself an instrument in the hands of God. I love this, and also that you're more of a steward of the gifts that you have rather than the source. So the tendency is like, these gifts are mine. I am the originator of them. That's the vicious side of the cleric, versus I have been given these things, not for myself, but to be made a gift to other people. And this concept of stewardshipness has also been something that's been very helpful for me, and showing up more as a servant.
I think the second half of that too is really helpful too, because it kind of fights the impatience. Like, consider yourself an instrument in the hand of God, which he may make use of at his own time.
Yeah, however he sees
and
fit.
however he sees fit. It's like a complete surrender to his will, which is very hard for a cleric to do. But I think even just having that mental image of that stewardship, I think is really helpful.
I would, if as a cleric, I would make it. I think this is very helpful for me. Make it a point to, in a nightly reflection, identify where anger showed up.
Or defensive,
or defensiveness, or some nuance of it, or even offensiveness, where that showed up in your day, and get curious about it. What was the thought behind it? What were the fruits of you acting in that anger if you chose to actually go with that inclination? Because again, this exercise starts to build a logical case to continuing to live in that anger, or choose it, or perceive it to be something that is good.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So how about we go into, if you guys are doing our journal, wonderful. We have a free download, so you can go on our website, catholiccoaching.com. You can get a free outline of what we do in our journal. It's daily exercises, 7 daily exercises. And if you are of the choleric temperament and you're kind of chuckling a little bit, also steaming out of your ears as you're listening to this.
Or you're married to a choleric.
Or you're married to one. Here are
and you're crying a little bit.
Some of our exercises that in the journal that you could kind of lean into a little bit more and work through it. And Matt, feel free to add to any that have helped you.
Sure.
But I think in exercise 3, where we're contemplating our goals with God, to take some time, to actually take some time and discern it, like lean into that exercise a little bit more. We have a lot of stuff in the back of the journal that explains what that looks like. We have a guided imagery, like you're going up to like offertory at Mass, and you're going up and bringing your desires and your goals up to God, and like letting him transform them or transubstantiate them into his will.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, a great one.
And I think what's important with that is getting really, when you're goal setting with God, getting really in touch with the why behind it, the motivation behind it, because typically, again, the choleric is that natural leader. You're not going there yourself. You're often bringing other people there. There's a responsibility that comes with that.
Amen.
And so if this is some sort of a self-serving ambition that is yours, it's not going to be something that is going to serve people or build up the kingdom. It's grounded in something that's rather vicious, and it needs to be perfected a bit. And so there's certainly, I like this, because especially even pairing this up with humility, because the choleric can just be like, rabbit, I'm right. My way is better, right? I have the better way. To really grow in that docility and be like, okay, Lord, I think that this is the best way, but your way you are the way. You are the perfect way. And so I am choosing with my will to surrender this way. And I want you to perfect it, to continue to perfect it.
And that has to be a logical thought. Like you need to have like really reasoned your way to that point. You can't fake it.
That God's way is better.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you want to look for evidence of that. And here's where I think that the next exercise is exercise 5, where we're reflecting on a thought and really finding out what's showing up in that behavior or that action line. So it's like we have a thought. From that thought, we have a feeling. And from that feeling, like we were saying in the last podcast, feelings incline us to act. So like, how are you showing up from that anger or defensiveness? Like truly, how are you showing up? That was really powerful for you to really make a robust, full action line.
Yeah.
And look at all of those things and be like, oh, this really is not leading to the place where I think it should be leading.
Or that I thought it would be leading. It's actually the opposite, or it's doing the thing that I don't want to do. So yeah, that again, it's leaning on that logical, the logical nature there. And so like even going back to exercise 4, where we have our thought recon. I mean, folks, if you struggle with believing that God's plan is actually better than your plan, I think that's a really strong belief that you're going to want to tackle.
Yes.
Because first of all, we just know in our head that it's not true. But if we're still feeling inclined towards that ungodly self-reliance and inclined to not ask God for help, or there's a resistance or an attachment to the way that we have chosen, right? There's a strong emotional attachment to it. Those are indications that we're lacking perhaps in the belief that God's way is best. And, I think of Jeremiah 27, what's 16 or 17, behold the plans I have for you, not for your destruction, but for your,
well, I mean,
for your well-being and
this
and
is going to
like
be
that.
really extreme, but like it's the pride of Lucifer. It's the pride of being like, I will not serve. Like, no, I have a better idea of how this needs to all play out.
Yep.
And so it's extreme, but like that is a way we need to tackle that pride. I struggled with this tremendously when my mom was passing away. Like, how could this be the will of God? And really struggling with that. And so I'm telling you, doing that work, you will find peace at the end of it. You will actually experience a peace that surpasses all understanding, even though logically you cannot understand it.
Exercise 6. What's the focus there for a choleric?
You need to understand that you need to repent. You need to take ownership of that. And you need like to have logical reasons for this step. And I think really looking at where your thoughts are leading you, like in the exercise before that, and saying like, oh yeah, I do not like it that I am showing up this way. And I'm not being productive. And I'm not, like you're actually showing up opposite of how you want to be showing up, like these natural inclinations. You're not showing up excellent or great, all of these natural motivations for the choleric. So really identifying those and saying like, these are my logical reasons to be repenting of this. It doesn't have to be a perfect reason yet. It doesn't have to be perfect contrition, which I think a lot of people think it needs to be this. Like I liken it to going to the gym. Like a lot of people think they need to be fit before they go to the gym. Like that's why you're going. So like in the same sense, you just being contrite and being like, I just don't like the way I'm showing up. It's imperfect contrition, but it's enough that God can work with, and it can open you up, and you can grow in that humility when you actually take ownership.
Yeah. I wanna.
Yeah.
I wanna prayer.
Yes. And then exercise 7, which is the metanoia, where we open up and we ask the Lord for his interpretation of this. It's, it's kind of the opposite of what Lucifer said. It's like, I will not serve. It's like, no, Lord, I will serve, and I am submitting my will to yours. So, yeah.
Cool. So all you cholerics out there, hope you learned a little bit about this and where you are. Again, the goal of this is to identify where you are at this map and this journey towards holiness, and what are some of those natural habitual ways that you're showing up viciously or virtuously. Allows you to kind of focus your work. Hope this has been helpful for you. It certainly is helpful for me to think of this. But if you want some more of this inside our academy, we're focusing on temperaments for the months of July. I think it's actually going to be a very important, big part of what we do. Temperaments and charisms are like a pretty important part, because like we've bounded ourselves really to under the mission of helping people know and live God's plan for their life.
Yeah,
right?
and these are big parts. These are like our natural tools.
Quite large, right? And they're knowable. That's the thing. It's like how are we operating in the strengths of our temperaments? How are we working on the weaknesses of our temperaments? How are we operating in the God-given charisms? How are we choosing to create an environment or enter into an environment where these things can really thrive, and I can show up and be a real contributor to the kingdom. So good stuff. Aaron, I love your choleric.
Oh, thank you.
Sometimes.
Same.
Sometimes.
But this is where we really need to kind of lean into these strengths of ours and not be discouraged, and pray for God's grace, and he's got something really beautiful for us. Like we said, some of the greatest saints were clerics, so he worked with it.
Yeah. So this is part 2 of a 5-part series. What do we got next week, Aaron?
Next week, we're going to be talking about my predominant, the other extroverted temperament, which is the sanguine, the popular sanguine.
So all you popular sanguines, or those married to the popular sanguines, or interacting with popular, everybody, all of you guys.
You're going to love it.
You're going to dig it. Okay. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.
Bye.